with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Today, I have Dr. Barrett Keene. He is the Director of Talent Development at Intuit. And, I am so excited for this conversation because anytime, Barrett, as I said to you before we started recording, I have an opportunity to speak with someone who not only has the academic credentials, but then also has this real world experience of I'm actually developing leaders each and every day, designing, going through the instructional design, working through the constraints. I always love those conversations. And so I'm so thankful for your time today. And before we jump in, what do folks need to know about you? Provide a little bit of context, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
For those folks in academia, you may be wondering, okay, well, how did this guy, wrapped up Cornell University, focusing on transformational leadership, full range of leadership model, concentrations in industrial psychology, organizational behavior. Why did he not end up in academia? And I'll just say I was planning on applying for professorships, but there was a kindergarten teacher in East Harlem, and she was really wonderful. And I really wanted to be able to convince her to be my wife. And so I just took a job that would get me to her and her to wherever she wanted to go to grad school. And so I ended up in strategy consulting, which I knew very little about, with Accenture Strategy. So huge, massive 800,000 person company all across the globe, and specifically in one unit, like kind of the most competitive, most innovative consulting group, which is their strategy consulting group. And I ended up really loving it. And so we moved to New York City. She said yes. She got into Stanford University. She studies sociology. She wrapped up with a Ph.D. and now she leads research at the Claim and Gender Institute on campus, looking at domestic violence and sexual assault. And I ended up just never applying to be a professor. And so, I would have loved that too, but I've been very fortunate the last 11 and a half years to be developing leaders, developing people every day. And after 4.5 years at Accenture, 13 different Fortune 500 companies, 11 Fortune 100 companies, 5 Fortune 50 companies, I had the chance to be able to help start leadership development, succession planning, performance management, talent reviews, and executive coaching at Tesla, where I was the executive coach for 5 of Elon's directs, which was very interesting and fun and dynamic. And then had the chance to be able to help recreate leadership development at Intuit, which is a financial tech company that I really love, that is focused on helping the little person, the little guy, the little lady, and then now kind of the mid-sized companies as well as consumers be able to take care of what they need to take care of financially and power prosperity around the globe. And I live in Palo Alto with my wife and my 2 little daughters. And we live close to Stanford University and enjoy Silicon Valley, enjoy learning with the really innovative minds out here. But at heart, I'm still a country boy who loves to read leadership textbooks and research articles and really enjoy thinking about maybe returning to academia sometime down the road.
Awesome. Well, you have your own leadership challenge there at home with 2 little ones.
No doubt.
Well, okay. So we're going to hone in our conversation with a very simple question from me today, which is just kind of, what are you seeing? What are some dynamics that you're experiencing right now? What are you seeing? You're on the front lines of this work. in organizational life. What are some themes that are popping up for you? What are you seeing? I'm just going to leave it there.
That sounds great. Yeah, a few things come to mind. The first thing is generative AI. It is massive already, and it will continue to be. I work in tech. And so every single day, our folks are using generative AI to be able to do what they need to do. If you are not using generative AI to do what you need to do and what you want to do, you're missing out, and you will be negatively impacted at some point in time in the future. And so if you're not having the chance to be able to dive in and utilize it every week, every day, I would encourage you to do that and to practice. I think that's going to be massive. It's going to shift the way that companies operate. It's going to have significant implications for the way work gets done. And some people, right, including kind of the father of organizational culture, would say that's what organizational culture is, how work gets done. And so I think, I was listening to a podcast with the CEO from Anthropic, which is a kind of a newer company in the generative AI space. And he mentioned that it feels like in the next 12 months that 90% of coding can be done by AI. And so consider if something complex like coding can be done by AI, what else can be done? And so it's going to be incredibly disruptive. It's going to be incredibly generative, impactful, and accelerant, but it's going to be huge. And so I think that is one thing. And it may not feel kind of as relevant to us in leadership development, but imagine this. If you are supporting leaders and you are not helping them augment their capabilities in terms of utilizing generative AI, they and your organization will be left behind. And if you're not helping them help their people build their capabilities in the generative AI space, it's going to be really impactful for folks. And so, yeah, I would just encourage folks to be able to dive in. Something I'm diving in every day. We're rolling out learning right now across all of our employees, being able to augment their capabilities to utilize generative AI. And so that's one thing that's not necessarily traditionally focused on in a response to this question.
Well, I love it because, I think even as you think about Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot serving as thinking partners. For instance, if you have a leader who's about to enter a difficult conversation and they need a little just-in-time coaching on some things to remember about navigating a difficult conversation, maybe even on a specific topic, well, that can be a thinking partner. Or if we're going to brainstorm, hey, how do we create a culture where Gen Zs feel like they can thrive? And we just want to brainstorm and have a conversation with a thinking partner. Of course, it's not perfect. It's the internet. It's not truth, but it's another tool to your point. And if we're not training our leaders to use this tool, I think quickly we could be left behind.
And so then in addition to generative AI, three other things that come to mind. A set of foundational capabilities. I studied the full range of leadership model, and, I felt like we skipped over transactional leadership as something that, you need to do well. It kind of needs to be the foundation, but then you get to the transformational leadership capabilities as quickly as possible, right? And you think about idealized influence and intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation, and you're focusing more on those four, and you're just kind of moving quickly through the transactional. But the assumption that it's like a staircase, and if you aren't incredibly strong, those foundational capabilities, the staircase falls down. Those first few steps kind of get a little bit weak. And I think in the academic space, we undersell the critical nature of those foundational capabilities significantly. Wow. And so I'll share the other two pieces, and then I'll come back to this one if that's okay.
Yeah.
The other two pieces are staying focused on the customer problem. It's not something that we necessarily think about a ton or talk about a ton, kind of in the academic realm, but that's critical. And I had the chance to be on a small team when Satya Nadella came into Microsoft, thinking about shifting the organizational culture of Microsoft. And that was one of the major values that he wanted to institute. And it's, as you look at kind of what Microsoft was doing in, 14, and then what Microsoft has been able to do since then, you can see all over the fingerprints of being able to be staying focused on the customer problem and how that's absolutely transformed their business. We do the same thing at Intuit. That's kind of one of the first part of our leadership framework, our leadership model is, we call it a playbook, is staying focused on the customer problem. So that's a big deal. And the last thing is leading with a clear vision. Kunz and Positive, we call that inspiring shared vision. But it's just critically important. And it's something that you have to do continually,
yes,
with all of your people. So, but coming back to those foundational capabilities, I feel like one of the things that I have not done a good job in over the last 11 years is appreciating fully the significance of those foundational capabilities and how hard they are to build in a specific group of leaders. So Intuit, a third of our managers at any point in time have been a manager at Intuit less than 1 year.
Okay.
Because of just that dynamic nature kind of a tech company. And so you're always having to invest in those foundational capabilities. And then also every time someone's context change, new team, maybe they bump up from being a senior manager, group manager to a director. It's just a humongous change and shift in kind of what they're doing, how they're trying to scale themselves. And so what it looks like to practice those foundational capabilities, it just gets more and more complex. And so when I say foundational capabilities, you could go a lot of ways. How we're talking about it at Intuit is goal setting, really being phenomenal at setting great goals, updating those as needed. They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be clear. They need to be bold. And they kind of set the foundation for everything. I think for years I went to a leadership workshop when I was in ninth grade. We heard SMART goals. All right, fine. And goal setting always just seemed a little bit boring to me. And I think I underappreciated the critical nature of it because it is. It's kind of the foundation for everything. We talk about clear priorities, which is incredibly hard to be able to ensure your team has clear priorities. Every single one of your team members has clear priorities on a continual basis, and that they are kind of what they should be, focused on the critical few, tied to those goals, providing actionable feedback, developmental feedback, and recognition feedback on an ongoing basis to accelerate the development of your people. And the last thing is removing barriers to speed and effectiveness. And I feel like this is not something that, Nordhaus doesn't have a chapter on how do you remove barriers, for your team. So it can be a little bit under focused on, I think in some circles, but critical in terms of especially if you're in a dynamic industry like technology, it's all about speed. It's all about scale. And so how do you move with that and ensure your team is? And so we actually just rolled out a global initiative that's providing 6 weeks of blended learning for all of our directors, our M1s, our M2s, M3s, so all director and below managers, which is over 90% of our leaders. And we've scaled that to all but 3 of our leaders. And so coming next week, those last 3 individuals will complete day 2 of their virtual learning experience. And then they'll start their asynchronous learning journey after that. And so that's a big deal. And so for scale, we're talking thousands of folks, but we're down to the last 3. Not to get into specific details for the company in terms of number of leaders. The vast majority, about, I'd say 65, 70% were in person at 10 different sites and then started their asynchronous journey. And the rest of the folks were in virtual workshops.
That's awesome. And, as you were speaking, I'd never really had this insight until you just said it, but it's so true. We jump over management by exception or contingent reward, jump over them, leap over them.
Like something you have to do before you do what you get to do. And it's off, honestly.
Yes. Well, I see it. I see it so clearly because if we don't have some of that management development, I mean, you could look at it that side of the house, so to speak, a little bit more management oriented. And, you of course, you have the 4 I's that are a little bit more leadership. But it's so imperative that and this is the Achilles heel, and one of the Achilles heels of leader development is that we oftentimes don't scaffold it well. I've said on the podcast before, we should probably start with active listening. Let's go to a base level skill that then stacks with something else that then is, the core of a relationship. And then again, to your point, the actual job of establishing clear goals, setting clear roles, and holding people accountable or creating a culture of accountability, influencing others, and delegating effectively. I mean, there's some basic blocking and tackling that you're bringing into the conversation right now that rarely has been discussed on this podcast.
And to be honest, it's not basic.
No.
It's not basic because the context is not basic.
Yes.
That makes sense. Like in the real world, the rubber meets the road, where you're having to make massive, significant choices every single day, and you're exhausted. All of these things that seem basic when we talk about it are really hard. When you're making choices and decisions around what are the top 5 priorities for your team in order, and then making sure that your manager agrees, sharing those with your stakeholders, having points of disagreement about what is important because one team has a different list of 5 things, and your number one might not be on their number 5, but they're your closest stakeholder. And then your team members have different perspectives and, thoughts about what should be happening. Just that one thing is really hard. And then ensuring that each of your team members, they have a clear understanding of what are their top 3 priorities in order. And then next thing you know, the product that you're working on, that completely gets shut down. And then you're working and pivoting to something else, or there's an external shift, or you learn something from your customers that the product that you're working on is ineffectual in some way. And so it's just so dynamic every single day that those foundational capabilities, which we want leaders to be able to do in their sleep, it's really hard. And so in addition to those 6 weeks of learning, we actually are planning April, May, June, July to then have extension learning activities just focused on removing barriers and feedback. And then we're coming back to goal setting in August and September. And then we'll actually be revisiting these basics, right? These foundational capabilities, literally from October 2nd last year, when we kicked off kind of this blended learning experience with workshops in San Diego, until next December, because we're trying to shore up the foundation of all of our leaders in terms of these foundational capabilities. And we talk about an augmentation effect, and then we will try to augment. But the challenging thing is we'll have hundreds of new leaders in the system next year. So you're continually always working and onboarding their first full year of management, right? And moving into the way you're newly promoted or you're newly hired. How do we continue to shore up that foundation? And then how do we revisit every 2 or 3 years these foundational capabilities across all of our leaders again?
Yeah, the dynamics that oftentimes you mentioned the Northhouse textbook, and of course, this is nothing against Peter Northhouse or Bruce Avolio and Bernard Bass.
Yeah,
so don't take it that way.
Yes, I love, the
but oftentimes these theories are divorced from some of those contextual realities, like time constraints, contextual factors that can't take that into consideration. Some of the real-time, very real-world issues that you're trying to navigate. Like, hey, we're going to have 30% new people in a year and a half, 2 years. How are we going to design that? How's that going to work?
And you're going to have that at all times. To be honest, when I transitioned, kind of out of academia into this work, it hurt my feelings that nobody seemed to care about these theories. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
It made me really sad, but no one cares. No one cares about the theories that we hold so dear. They just don't. And that still burdens me because I think it's a deep underappreciation for theories that can be incredibly helpful. But I literally have to, in kind of my line of work, filter what I'm talking about and just say, nobody cares about these giants that we kind of hold dear, and for good reason. But I have to just drop the name of the theory, and there's research-based perspectives that would suggest X, Y, or Z, and just keep it very simple because eyes begin to glass over the moment I start, listing out the names of kind of theories or the researchers that come up with them, which makes me still sad. It's just a different world kind of as a practitioner that's, less than ideal too.
Yes. I know you could potentially go a little bit deeper on those areas that you mentioned. But what else do you want to is on your radar? What are you thinking about? What's top of mind for you as you do this work?
Yeah, the other two are staying focused on the customer problem. I never heard that at all.
Talk about it. Because I've never talked about that on this podcast in almost, 290 episodes.
All right. Yeah, it's all good. All right. Come back with me to 2013. And let's try to think about some commercials that you might have seen. And so the commercials from Microsoft were they were comparing Microsoft products, the Surface, their tablet versus an iPad, or their computers versus your MacBook. And they were basically trying to say, look at all these features. They're better. Our computer, the battery is longer, the computer moves faster, the memory is better. They're so much better than Apple in all these ways. And Apple was serving their lunch to them, absolutely dominating Microsoft. And what they were doing is they were building very capable products that excited engineers and weren't focused on the user experience as much as Apple.
Yep.
And Apple had simple products that didn't have some of the capabilities that Microsoft products were, but they absolutely dominated Microsoft and a market share to a point where Microsoft was beginning to crumble. And so they hired an engineer, one of their engineers, to be their CEO. And he came in, and customer obsession became one of their company values. And it's something that we focused on specifically with their pre-partner population. So think director and senior director. And there were 400 hypo leaders, and we had the chance to be able to develop a leadership development experience with their internal staff that was focused on building capability for their leaders, but all within the context of customer obsession, and shifted the culture with a lot of efforts. I just played a very, very small part, but a lot of efforts to be able to increase a focus on customer obsession. And so at Intuit, we also have a very, very deep history in terms of, we say, staying focused on the customer problem, but we do follow me homes where we are with customers all the time, understanding how do they use our products? Why would they use our products in ways that we would not expect for them to use our products, et cetera. And we try to just stay dialed in on the customer experience, the customer pain points, the customer needs. And then, the first behavior on purpose in our leadership playbook is staying focused on the customer problem. And when we crafted that leadership playbook, because it was like week 2 at Intuit, when I heard that we were going to have this opportunity, I was like, well, that couldn't be any better. We had focus on the customer problem. And our CEO said, no. It's staying focused on the customer problem. That every single day you should know what your customers are dealing with, what their pain points are, what they need, and how can you deliver for them. And that's the same thing. Right? If you're a middle school teacher, how are you staying focused on the customer problem? We might call it individualized consideration. Does that make sense?
Yep.
You know your customers deeply. If you're a mid-level manager, you know your team. You know their motivations, their insecurities, their deep desires, their long-term goals, what's happening outside of work. But you know your customers deeply, and then you serve your customers. And I just feel like it is under-attuned. Bob Keegan in Immunity to Change, he said, I feel like for too long we have, in leadership development, we have under-attuned to the development part of that. And we over-attuned to leadership. And I feel like that's an area of leadership development that I never heard about either. And then you get in companies, really great companies, and you realize that is absolutely central to the way that they lead. It's something that we might think about, in research, is understanding the critical nature of that. How do leaders do that well? Why is it so critically important? But I would say it impacts everything.
Yeah. Well, and you just made me, I'm literally speaking out loud, so this might be the most horrible idea in the world, but you could look at transformational leadership at levels. You could look at it at an individual level, a group level, but at the organizational level, is the organizational, to your point of individualized consideration, if the organization is focusing on that population of people, that's a version of individualized consideration or intellectual stimulation. I mean, Apple did a beautiful job of that as a company, the stimulating, wow, could I be like Jim Henson? Again, in some of that why literature that Sinek talks about, where they sold kind of an identity versus a longer battery life, and it stimulated a number of people and activated a number of people, influenced a number of people to go and buy their products and to value their products, me included. So it's such an interesting conversation. Well, as we begin to wind down our time, what is one other thing you'd like to express to listeners? What else comes to mind for you, sir?
Yeah, the last piece is the leading with a clear vision. Again, Inclusive Posture, we'll call it inspire shared vision. I think one of the things that I have specifically been impressed with our CEO at Intuit, Sasan Darzi, is his perpetual, consistent focus on doing that. Does that make sense? So somewhere between 2 and 4 times each year, right, over the past 6 years, we have had a state of the company. And so that's where everybody gets together. It's a blast. And every single time he has come back to, what is our strategy? What are our big bets? Why is this critically important? We show videos of interviews and videos where customers are talking about their problems, their challenges, and how does Intuit address those? How do we solve those? When you're a single mother trying to be able to get by, taking care of your kids, and you've got a little business, how are you doing that? And how does Intuit be able to help you do the things you don't want to do or don't know how to do to be able to provide for your family? And specifically in that process, Lord and Brown wrote a book. It's been a while, but Leadership Processes and Follower Self-Identities. And in that book, they are incredibly critical of what we do in leadership development, and for good reason. And they basically make an argument that we approach leadership in a way that doesn't appreciate how incredibly complex it is. And when I say we, I don't just mean folks in academia. I actually mean more so folks like me. And you're kind of with one hand tied behind your back, kind of within the constraints and assumptions of the organizations you're serving, trying to do leadership development in a way. But what they would say is we basically say, look, you need to do A, B, and C, and you're going to get X, Y, Z. And that is way more complex than that. And we take these behavioristic approaches. And so what they recommend is a much bigger focus on the follower. They say that leadership might start with the leader, but it actually happens much more within kind of the space in which the follower is making sense about themselves, making meaning about themselves, who they desire to be, and those complicated spaces in between. But specifically what some leaders like Satya Nadella and Sasanka Darzi do incredibly well as they do, and Elon Musk, but to the point of kind of manipulation. Does that make sense? At Tesla, and I can share more about that sometime later, but because that was fascinating working there and doing leadership people development there. But how do you consistently share the vision on a consistent basis? And I think that's something that we don't emphasize enough. The over and over and over repetition does not ruin the prayer. Right? It only amplifies it in this particular scenario. But then how do we, as Lord and Brown would recommend, help people attach who it is they see themselves and desire to see themselves to that larger vision? And the critical nature of not just doing that, but doing that just like a repeated drumbeat in your organization. What is the vision, and how do you help people connect who they deeply are, who they want to be, based on their motivations, their values, their interests, to that larger vision? And it's critical. And it's one of the reasons why Tesla, in all of its kind of divisiveness and messiness and everything else, if you look at what they've been able to do, what no other startup in the automotive industry has been able to do, or energy, right now AI, is because they help their people attach who they deeply are, who they see themselves, to that larger vision in a way that is so strong that small teams have beaten giants in multiple industries. And so I think those are some areas that not only both feel important, but also maybe underemphasized in research in some ways, at least some of the nuances of them, that could be fun to think about and talk about more.
Yeah. Well, Barrett, I'm so thankful for your time today. I'm thankful for your wisdom. I love the fact that you are day to day in the organization doing that work, and then you're pulling out Lord and Brown. Bob Lord would feel really good right now.
Well, it's one of my favorite books, honestly.
And so it's wonderful. And so we will talk again. We will put that on the radar for sure. And just because I've learned so much and just really, really enjoyed you challenging my thinking in new ways. And of course, I just love that. I always close out by just asking what you've been listening to, what you've been reading, what's caught your attention in recent times. It may have something to do with what we've just discussed. It might be that you're watching Severance. Whatever it is, what's caught your attention in recent times that listeners might be interested in?
So I was a middle and high school teacher, actually volunteered 3 years full time. I'm kind of a bleeding heart, and I like to push myself, and I like to kind of learn on the edges and learn from people that have very different perspectives from me. So lately I've actually been reading and listening to quite a lot of Jeffrey Pfeffer.
Oh,
are you familiar with Jeffrey Pfeffer?
Power.
Yes, Power. And to be honest, I don't like kind of some of the deep assumptions that are involved and that guide the work. But I'm currently listening to 7 Rules of Power, and I have appreciation for informed perspectives that are different than mine. And so reread Managing with Power, which I read for the first time in like 2006. And I'm listening to 7 Rules of Power. And I'm just trying to think about, how do I question my own assumptions? How do I help leaders grow in ways that are very realistic? But then how do I do that in alignment with my own values, priorities, motivations? And so, I'm in a Pfeffer stage right now, and I'm being challenged, and I'm discarding some of it, and I'm incorporating what I can.
Well, he's down the road from you, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, my daughters love to play at the business school. Yeah. There's some really fun things they like to jump off of. He walked by just a couple of weeks ago. I said, hello? And he said, hello. But I didn't bother him.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
He's so powerful. You know what I mean? So it's so powerful. I didn't even bother with him. But yeah, and the last thing I would say is, I've got a 1 and a 4-year-old, so I haven't been to ILA, in a minute. Next year, I plan on going. And so I would love to get connected. I'd love to get involved. And so, if folks that are listening, want to chat, I like learning from people that are doing this great work and studying this great work. And so if you have perspectives, you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I have a lot to learn and a little to give, and I'm happy to be able to help however I can, and happy to be able to learn from folks every day. So hopefully I'll see you, not in Prague, but maybe I'll see you next year, wherever that may be. I haven't looked at the next conference.
I'm not sure. It may be in Canada again. I don't know. But yes, I would love that. And as always, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for the good work that you do. And we'll do it again. I think a limitation of our work at times is that we, as Barrett said, we jump over some of the basic blocking and tackling of what it means to manage, whether that's delegation, negotiation, difficult conversations, and oftentimes jump over that into the sexier leadership, quote unquote, content in our programming. And we can have a fun conversation. Ron Riggio has a beautiful blog post about, the difference between leadership and management and how historically they've kind of been used synonymously. One way we could think about it is that managers plan, organize, and control, and focus on implementation and enacting the vision. And we could think about how leaders inspire, mobilize, energize, and vision. But bottom line, we need good human beings to be good at both. We don't have a vision realized if we haven't managed it into reality. And so why I really loved this conversation is that at Intuit, they are focusing on some of that basic blocking and tackling of what it means to be a great manager. And it goes back to this dialogue around scaffolding. How do we scaffold this content so that we best prepare people to serve in these very challenging roles? And I don't think we have clarity on that right now. I don't think we have any sense of how that should be scaffolded. And I think that's an opportunity. As always, thanks so much for checking in. Take care. Be well. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.